and welcome to Mystery in Time. My name is Anne, and on this channel we will be looking into some of the world's most historical cold cases. And I'd like for you to join me on that journey as we hunt down witness statements, piece together the evidence, and ultimately reveal our suspects. So let's get stuck in to our first ever Mystery in Time, the Manhattan Well murder. It was alleged that on the evening of Sunday the 22nd of December 1799 that a Mr. Levi Weeks of the city of New York did wilfully and with malice aforethought make an assault upon Juliana Elma Sands by casting, throwing and pushing said victim down the Manhattan Well in Lispenard Meadows, New York. Within the first few days of the new year in 1800, the Manhattan, New York newspapers were awash with reports that stunned not only the Greenwich community, but undoubtedly the entire population of Manhattan. The Spectator reported that yesterday afternoon the body of a young woman by the name of Juliana Elma Sands was found dead in a well recently dug by the Manhattan Company, a little east of Mr. Tyler's. The circumstances attending her death are somewhat singular. She went from her uncle's house in Greenwich Street last Sunday evening with her lover with an intention of going to be married, from which time until yesterday afternoon she had not been heard of. Strong suspicions are entertained of having been wilfully murdered. Lispenard Meadows was for a time a long forgotten wetland upon which now sits the Tribeca neighbourhood. At the time of Elma Sands' death, the meadow lay on the northern fringes of New York City, looking out onto the Hudson River. Lispenard Meadows was named after a French Huguenot family, the Lispenards, who emigrated to the colonies during the 17th century. They became landowners of much of the land west of Broadway and south of the canal. The problem was that much of the land was swamp and marshland, somewhat untamed. Indeed, it was the source of repeated mosquito infestations during the spring and summer months. The swamp was later drained and developed, much to the delight of the populace. It was quite popular in the winter months, with many, but especially courting couples, when the pond froze over and the snow lay like a blanket on the ground. The merriment and romanticism of ice skating and late night sleigh rides through a landscape that had been magically and beautifully transformed. On this meadow you would have found the recently built Manhattan Well. Built in 1799 by the Manhattan Company, its sole purpose was to provide fresh water to the citizens following an outbreak of yellow fever in 1795, an epidemic that had continued its vice-like grip on the people of Manhattan. But what did this well look like back in 1799? If we want to know what it looks like now, we have but to take a walk into the basement of 129 Spring Street, Manhattan, New York, and in that basement still lies the very well in which Elma met her fate. Although I cannot find any documentation relating to the construction or the dimensions of the Manhattan Well, it does not seem too presumptuous to assume, in the absence of any other evidence, that hand-dug wells of the time would have been pretty much standard. 1, they would have been approximately 4 foot in diameter. 2, they would have been anywhere between 10 foot to 60 foot deep, dependent on the water table level. 3, they would have contained in the region of 6 foot to 9 foot of water, again dependent on the water table level and dependent on the weather. Snow can fall quite heavily in Manhattan, and it was no different in Elma's time. In fact, we know from witness statements that it was bitterly cold and there had been heavy snowfall in the winter of 1799. On the afternoon of the 2nd of January 1800, Elias Ring, together with his neighbour, Mr. Joseph Watkins, walked quickly up Greenwich Street towards the well. You see, he'd received news that a lady's fur muff had been found some days earlier in the vicinity of, or possibly in the well. His wife's niece, Miss Elma Sands, had been missing since the night of Sunday the 22nd of December 1799. He must have been imagining the worst as he pressed forward. Armed with poles, which they later drove nails into to act as hooks, Elias and his associates pulled the young girl's body out of the well and laid her on a plank next to it. Sadly, it was indeed young Elma Sands, a mere 22 years old. Here we are. So there we have it. We have on our hands a case that once embarked upon, I guarantee you, you will never forget. A young lady's lifeless body has just been discovered and lies sodden with water beside the Manhattan well on Lispenard Meadows, with little clue to how she got there. Was she murdered? Did someone despise her so much that they guaranteed she would never take another breath? Was it suicide? Perhaps heartbroken, perhaps jilted by a lover, Elma threw herself down the well? Or was it an accident? Had Elma simply slipped and fallen in somehow and was unable to claw her way out? If you take a look in the description box down below, you will find a link to the entire trial of Levi Weeks versus the People, and it makes for some fascinating reading, sometimes confusing. I'll be doing a series of videos on this because, as I'm sure you appreciate, it is impossible to fit it all into one video and do Elma justice. Perhaps there's one snippet of information out there that has been overlooked for over 200 years. Perhaps we will find it. Let me know in the comments section what you guys think. What are your thoughts on the case? Do you think you know who the murderer is? Is it possible you're wrong? If you want to hear more, give us a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. And I'll see you next week for part 2 of the Manhattan Well murder. Be safe and stay well.